what the Occupy movement, it's really pushing for us to move the way markets function from the vital to the mental level. So there's a democratization of markets that occurs at this level, in which wealth is more equitably distributed, in which innovation has its roots in many different areas, in which there's a non-monopolistic basis of power, so power is distributed itself. So we can see that when we think about the Occupy movement, it really is around trying to push this fractal for progress from the vital to the mental. When we think about Arab Spring, for instance, what we see is, if we think about this same pattern of progress, V to M, here we can see that we were for decades at this level, at the physical level. It was a status quo. It was marked by an autocracy of perhaps tyrannical power, and the very rebellion, the act of rebellion, and the breakup of this basis of power is a movement from here to here. So there's a much vaster, it's leading to a much vaster and different kind of experimentation and basis of power, but that in its reality is what that movement is about. And if we think about the European Union and the talk about integration that is accompanying the resolution of the debt crisis that we see today, we'll see that the European Union in itself, in its fractal towards the democratization of markets, it's perhaps has been at this level where there's been basic norms laid out at some level, and today we're seeing that the basis of integration, there's a real emphasis to get the basis of integration to be at this level, the vital level, in which there is financial principles or guidelines that would establish that greater fiscal union. But really what we want to get to is, again, this notion of a true democratization of the European Union, in which you have many bases of power, you have many bases of innovation and creativity, which happen all over the Union and not just in a few spaces. So when we look at all these different movements, what we really see is where in this fractal for progress from the physical to the vital to mental, they seem to be stagnating. And when we think about the nature of bubbles, which we've experienced a lot of recently, so a bubble is really wherever in this fractal or this pattern of progress we've stagnated, and where there's the underlying impetus to move, that gap. So if the underlying impetus is to move to the vital, for example, like in the Arab Spring, we're trying to move to the vital fundamentally, but we're here, then this disparity is exercised in a bubble that's created, in which for decades we think that we've existed in this reality of creation of value, but it's false value because it's not quite what the underlying impetus is trying to drive us towards. So as a result, there's a bubble of power that's created, that's burst when the rebellions begin to take place. Or similarly, when we think about the Occupy movement is trying to get us to move in financial markets from the vital to the mental, so a true distribution of market power. And here what we see is that we've been in this reality, the vital, for a long time, when in effect we have to move here. And so there's huge bubbles that are created that are a result of this disparity. And the Occupy movement is really, in a sense, pointing to this bursting of this bubble. Or similarly in the EU, in the case of the EU integration, we have bubbles that indicate the lack of true integration. We're at this reality, but we have to move towards this reality, and what we're seeing today is the bubble bursting to move us towards here. So in a sense, any kind of a bubble can be thought of as a stagnation that occurs. And when we step back from all of this to think about the democratization of markets, this is really the true driving force behind each of these different movements. And if we think of democratization of markets on a global level, the global democratization of markets, then what we can expect through 2012 and beyond is going to be a lot of focus on this. And the reason being because if we think about some of these, the way it's playing out regionally, for example, in the USA, we've already seen that because the Occupy movement is, if we use this as the basis, physical to vital to mental, we know that here we're trying to move from here to here. The end goal, of course, or we'll be more secure if we were at this level globally. If we think about the Middle East, where the Arab Spring is occurring, we're really at this level here. If you think about the European Union's debt crisis, we are somewhere at this level. And if we think about other regions of the world, for example, in China, just very recently, for example, in China, there's been this year, there's for example, been the spontaneous creation of a number of different exchanges, like stock exchanges and other market exchanges, which number to about 90 that were formed this year, and the government is putting a stop on all this. So really, even though the impulse is to move toward the vital level, it's moving backwards here, and that can only create a lot of problems because underlying it is this natural impulse to move in this direction. So globally, we can expect in 2012 and beyond a lot of issues that have to do with the democratization of markets. They have different names in different places. And similarly, we'll see in Latin America, if we think about the huge oil reserves that off the coast of Brazil and the discovery of those and what the government is wanting to do with it, what we really want to see is effectively how that can democratize markets. But in effect, what we're going to see is, say, centralized power and control over it, which means that there's going to be a lot of heartache as we move across this scenario, or even in India, where there's been a huge emphasis on corruption. So here we can say that while we're at this level in terms of its politics, the whole movement on anti-corruption is trying to move us out of this into some levels beyond, but it has to again span through all this before it reaches this stage. But the underlying, no matter what movement we're seeing across the world, it has to do with this democratization of markets, and the very fact that we are not at this point means that there's going to be a lot of news that's created as we begin to move toward this in 2012 and beyond across all regions of the world.